Grayson Grundhoefer, co-host of the Bearcast with Craig Smoke Tuesdays, also football analyst, recruiting coordinator for Sic'Em365.com, joins us on 365 Sports with Paul and Craig, and I'm David Smoke. Grayson, thank you very much. So I had a chance to visit with Dave Aranda. You've been at all the practices. He kind of mentioned that Blake Shapen has stepped up the way he should, that he was always a good practice quarterback, but maybe didn't carry that enough into the games. Has Sawyer Robertson allowed that to maybe be something he's better at?
I think that's possible. You know, when we went back and kind of went through Sawyer Robertson's recruitment and kind of, you know, going through the reasons why Baylor would bring in a transfer quarterback and everything like that. Obviously, the Austin Novosad part of it, you know, played a role in them going out and getting Sawyer Robertson. But, you know, I think that for Blake, this is a time where I feel like he knew that what he put on film last year and what he did last year did not equate to a guy who was locked and loaded as for sure the starter for the 2023 season. And so I think he's taken that as a challenge. And it's a situation where I don't think he believes he played his best football. I don't think the Baylor staff thinks he played his best football. But I think there's a lot of confidence on both sides that Blake can rebound really nicely. And I think it's a situation where you bring in Sawyer Robertson, you know there's competition, you know there's a really talented quarterback who's competing against you, and it's time to rise, you know, to the forefront. And so for Blake, obviously he needs to be more consistent and actually, you know, translate what he does in practice to the field. But I think a big part of what happened last year was he wasn't quite ready to be the leader that I think he could be this year. And that's a huge growing, you know, part of the growth process for any quarterback is taking that leadership role. And I think last year, you know, he won a battle over a guy in Gary Bohannon who was a really good leader. So I think it was kind of hard for him to establish himself in that short period of time during the summer and the fall. But I think so far this spring, I think he's made that more of a focus. And to be honest, Sawyer Robertson has as well. I think both these guys are good leaders for this football team and guys who have really embraced challenge of competing against each other.
Grayson, how much rope do you think that Blake Shapen will get, though?
I mean, Paul, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that he's going to be the starter week one. So I don't think that there is any rope right now. Now, I will say this. I think whoever does win the starting job, if it's Blake or Sawyer, I think they'll be given every opportunity to keep that job. They did it last year. They allowed Blake to play through struggles, even though, you know, he was pretty good for the most part. And the defense, you know, he had moments in games that weren't good, and those were very glaring. But we also have to remember, guys, the defense was not good last year. So they were playing a lot of, you know, keep-ups. They were playing some catch-up, and that's hard on any quarterback. But last year they allowed him to play through it. I think whoever the quarterback is this year, at least in the first half of the year before the bye week, they're going to, you know, go up against some really, really good teams. And I think we'll probably know if whoever the starter is, if he's going to last through those 6 games, because if the quarterback doesn't play well, there's a great chance that Baylor goes 2-4. But if the quarterback is playing well and they start off 5-1 or 6-0 or something like that, then I think you're feeling really, really good about the position.
Grayson, we also heard from Dallas Baker and the wide receivers. That's an interesting group. They return, you know, a lot of their top guys numbers-wise, but a lot of inexperience. They lost some guys in the transfer portal who kind of had a little bit of experience there. Guys like Jalen Ellis, who you had a lot of, you know, hope for. But, man, Monterey Baldwin, who admittedly has to get bigger and stronger to remain healthy, and then just a bunch of guys. I mean, what do you think of what you heard from Dallas Baker and just the approach of that room? And are you buying into the, I guess, committee success that this room could have?
I mean, I think Dallas Baker is really confident in the group. And, I mean, he basically said that. He has a ton of confidence in the guys in that room. I think when I sit back and look at it, I see about 6 guys that I really, really trust in the receiver room. And I think those 6 are pretty obvious. You know, if you go through them, it's Baldwin, Neighbors, Winfield, Keytron Jackson, Hal Presley, Josh Cameron. Those 6 guys, I think, have established themselves. There's some other guys that are intriguing as well, don't get me wrong. But those 6 guys, I think, really are leading that room. And I'm fully expecting Arkansas transfer Keytron Jackson to have a massive impact on this team. I've been really high on him since he was in high school. He went to Arkansas, didn't quite get the playing time that he wanted, but a very, very talented receiver and a guy who I think does a lot of things that Baylor really needed from the receiver position last year, such as getting open on the outside and then creating yards after the catch. Those are things that they didn't really have last year, and he's going to bring that to the table. And I expect him to be, borderline all Big 12 type performer this season as long as the offense continues to hum. And then you also have, explosive playmakers. Monterey Baldwin, Jordan Neighbors, very explosive. You have an elite blocker in Josh Cameron and a guy who's shown reliable hands to make tough catches. And then Hal Presley, who's kind of a wild card, who's shown flashes of great potential, but I think it's just consistency for him on the outside. But, as I sit here, I see 6 guys that I think should be able to make any of the quarterbacks pretty successful this season.
Grayson, if the wide receivers and DBs or corners went one-on-one, and that's what they do, the position drills, et cetera, but are you getting any feedback on whether the secondary is any better?
I think the secondary right now is probably my biggest area of concern through the spring. And I don't really think that's all that surprising. I mean, they lost so many pieces from the team last year. I mean, if you just think about it, Devin Neal, Lorando Johnson, Al Walcott, Lorando Johnson, Mark Milton. I mean, those are 5 guys that played a ton of football for Baylor, and now you're replacing them with a bunch of guys who haven't played a lot of snaps during their time at Baylor. And then also Devin Lemire is out right now during the spring. So, I mean, literally no guys who have any meaningful playing time really are out there. And so I think they're going through an adjustment process. I think there's a lot of growth that this unit is going to take through, spring ball and then heading into the summer. But I also think it's a position that could use adding some older guys. I don't think Baylor's going to, skip on taking a cornerback or maybe even a safety out of the transfer portal if they have the numbers for it. And I think that's coming up tomorrow, actually. The transfer portal opens again. So I expect those 2 positions to be looked at heavily just because it's a young group. They're very talented. But I think this spring we're kind of finding out that there's a lot of room to grow, and they probably need a little bit more experience.
So, Grayson, the transfer portal opens tomorrow. Baylor has a game next Saturday. That cuts about half of that window in half from when they'll be practicing or having a spring game. Does that mean that they're up against the wall, have to make a decision, but can't really do that until after they're done?
I think they have a pretty good idea of how many spots they currently have, and you're obviously not going to be able to recruit past those spots. You're going to have to recruit the number that you have, and then after the spring game, if more guys enter, then that just gives you, more opportunities to go out and look for potential targets. But you are right. A lot of teams have finished their spring ball already, and it's kind of perfect for those programs because what guys are leaving. Guys that pretty much are going to make decisions in the next 14 days. It's not going to be cut in half for them. So it is an advantage for those programs. But I think Baylor and the staff pretty much knows what they need to do, the positions they need to target. So right now, I think it's more so just about trying to figure out exactly how many spots they have following the spring game.
Go ahead, Craig.
How will the unlimited official visits affect Baylor positively or negatively, or both?
Good question, and something that I've thought about a little bit and trying to figure out, okay, so going back, how many times did Baylor really benefit from a guy taking his final official visit to Baylor? And there really haven't been a ton of instances where a guy used all 4 of his official visits and then took a visit to Baylor late and then decided to switch to Baylor. So for me, I don't think it's going to impact Baylor, too much negatively. I know a lot of people will say, well, what if at the very end of the process, the guy takes an official visit somewhere? But I would say most guys who go through their process committed to Baylor have official visits open. And so I don't think this is going to matter too much in the long run. But I think for recruits, it's going to be very nice because you might as well take as many official visits as you possibly can. I think that gives Baylor more kind of ammunition to say, hey, you might as well come and take an official visit. We're not wasting one. And maybe that allows Baylor to get more guys on campus. So I actually think it's a slight positive, but overall I don't think it's going to be a massive impact towards Baylor positively or negatively.
Now, I have one more question for you. This is something we've kind of touched on the podcast from time to time, but just the other day, I believe it was Kobe Black from Connolly High School released his top 11. and there is no Baylor in his top 11. What is the disconnect right now, you think? Connolly's been pumping out guys. You know, Midway's had their share over the years, but what do you think the disconnect kind of is locally, it seems like, where there's some top prospects? Like, this is a 5-star cornerback. TCU's on the list. Texas is on the list. A&M's on the list. What's the disconnect with the local stars and Baylor right now in your mind?
So I actually think that Baylor's done a pretty good job in the local area. I mean, you go look at Killeen, they've landed some guys from there, Devontae Tizino, Brendan Bett. I think they've done a fine job in those areas. But what I will say is, you know, when a guy becomes a 5-star recruit or a high 4-star type guy, it becomes one of those situations where is it really worth it to put all this time and all these resources into recruiting a guy when the chances of you landing them are extremely low? And a lot of those guys, honestly, don't necessarily want to stay in the state of Texas. And I know Kobe's got a list of 11. That's great. That's 11 schools, though. So, I mean, there's a lot of schools that are out of the state. There's a lot of schools that might be set up better NIL-wise. And I think that's just the reality of it. So Baylor's going to pick and choose their battles. Now, when Baylor really, really wants a guy, we've seen them continue to recruit that guy for a really long time, such as Austin Novosad. You know, he was the guy who got offers from pretty much everyone towards the end of his recruitment. Baylor kept recruiting him, kept him committed. It didn't end up going well, but I think in the long run, Baylor's got to pick and choose those battles. And honestly, when they don't, you know, try to continue recruiting a top 100 guy in the entire nation, I think sometimes that honestly does make sense because they can spend those resources on other guys who maybe have a better chance of ending up at Baylor, and maybe guys who Baylor sees as, you know, comparable or at least somewhat comparable to those higher end guys across Central Texas.
Okay, a somewhat off, just a random question. Dave Aranda compared Sawyer Robertson to a puppy that he and the Aranda family have just had. They have a new puppy. And the family was out of town, so he had to deal with the puppy. And you know how puppies are. There's never enough attention for them, and they can get to be a little bit annoying as much as they are cute. That's kind of how he described Sawyer Robertson's personality, infectious, contagious type attitude. What kind of puppy would he be?
Wow. That's, I mean, so I'm just guessing a random puppy here, huh? I'll go with, how about a golden retriever?
All right.
I think that sounds
all right.
right.
Okay. I'm not sure what kind of puppy it is. I didn't ask him, but I just thought that was interesting because he's got that infectious personality, but that doesn't mean he's the guy because we know Blake Shapen seems like he's taken on the challenge. Thanks for your time, Grayson, as always. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend. Grayson Grundhoefer with us, 365 Sports, Sic'Em365.com, co-host of the Bearcast, and also recruiting coordinator for what we do. So there we are with